Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike. It's Wednesday, which means it's time to get into it. This is the Definitive Leadership Podcast, your opportunity to listen and learn and grow from people that have been down the path. Either, they're in maybe a similar spot to where you are, maybe they're further down the path. You have an opportunity to listen to what their successes are so that you can take those shortcuts. You have an opportunity to maybe listen to what their failures are so you can take those shortcuts and avoid them. So today I have got, we talk with just amazing people from all different verticals of business and talk about their business and leadership background. And I'm very, very excited. I have Kash Rocheleau on the show. She was started as the chief financial officer for Icon Foods. She's now the CEO. She has a awesome background, amazing background in financial operations, compliance, leadership, management, regulatory compliance. She's grown businesses and companies, and I am excited to have her on the show today. And there it is. Kash, nice to see you. Thank you for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure's all
Absolutely.
mine.
So, if you would take a few minutes here and just take us down sort of your leadership memory lane, if you will. What is your background in business? Where did you get started? Did you start right after university? How did you get into business? What did that path look like? And then how did that lead you to where you're at right now?
Well, my path is very unconventional. I've married to my husband for almost 15 years now, and we always wanted kids. It was a dream of mine to be a stay-at-home mom, wife, homemaker until I had the opportunity to do it. And as soon as I was living the dream that I thought was the dream, I realized how much I disliked it. I just felt like there was no purpose, and I want to be careful to those that are stay-at-home moms, wives, husbands, dads, and fully love it and get purpose out of it. It just wasn't for me. And so I did it for about 7 months and finally had a conversation with my husband about how I didn't love it and I wanted to go back to work. And he was fully supportive. My degree was in business, just a general business degree. Wasn't really sure what area of business I wanted to be in. And so I started at the bottom of the barrel as an executive assistant to the CFO and fell in love with the finance side of things. I think a lot of people think finance is math, and while it is, it's really creating stories with the information that you're given and filling in the gaps that aren't fully visible. And and so I worked my way up as an accountant, as a controller, went back to school and got my master's in accounting and finance, and later went on to take over as the CFO. And in that journey, I was not shy to learn about all areas of the business. And when I say all areas, I mean going and getting forklift certified, being on the production line, getting into the sales process, building relationships, attending trade shows, anything that was available as an opportunity for me to learn, I fully jumped in with both feet. And about a year ago, I was approached by the board and the founder and then CEO with the opportunity to take over as CEO. And it was no exception that I fully jumped in to that opportunity as well.
So let me ask you, when you said, "Hey, I started out with it as the executive assistant and so forth," and so you came in, boots on the ground.
Mhm.
Was that for Icon Foods, or did you work through some other different businesses and so forth?
It was for Icon Foods, but we have quite a few parent companies. So it was kind of, I mean, it was, while it was Icon Foods, it was also learning other businesses and industries as the parent of Icon Foods.
Got you. So I'm curious, a couple of things. Um, as you're going through and you're moving from sort of the hierarchy, for lack of a better term, and you feel free to correct me because I haven't worked in that world, right? As you go through the hierarchy of, okay, I started as an executive assistant, and then I worked through finance, and then I worked through, you sound like a finance assistant, or you said then to into accounting, and then a CFO, and so forth. And I'm probably not perfect with your path. I'm probably butchering it. But as you go through that, did you find it difficult when you were taking that move? Because to me, up to that point, you're very much a staff member, a peer
Mhm.
of people. And then you move into that CFO role. Now, were there other management style roles prior to that, or when you moved into the CFO, which I would consider more of an executive role?
Mhm.
When you moved into that, did you find it difficult to go from being a peer to leading others?
I think yes and no. So the part that was pretty seamless for me was the fact that I had great mentorship and I had a great lead in how to manage and lead people with care and compassion. And it was from a woman. And there's
Mm-hmm.
no digs again at men, but I think that women have a way of being a little softer in their approach, firm, but softer in their approach. And I think that they have a little less ego attached. And so they're willing to bring people along with the process. And so I had that example for me. And so as I was coming up the ranks, that was the example that was presented to me, which made it really easy for me to then give back in that way. I would say the difficulty in that transition was the fact that we're a smaller company. We have 25 employees, and so we're very much a community, very integrated with each other. And there are definitely fine lines in being that, that leader, the manager, the person of authority that has to make hard decisions that aren't
Mm-hmm.
always popular, but also being, the colleague that you want people to trust and be able to interact with and communicate when things are going wrong, and not have this fear of she's the boss or he's the boss. And so it certainly presented challenges. But I think if you can lead with purpose, um, and with a kind heart, and really explain your why along the way, you tend to be able to walk that fine line pretty seamlessly, especially with that younger generation coming in. The why really helps like a lot. In they need to know why they're doing something, whether
Oh, man.
it's important or not. If you're telling them to call 100 customers, they're not going to do it with quality, with purpose, with intention, unless they understand the why behind it. And that can go for any sort of thing
Sure.
that's going on in business. When you give someone the why, you give them purpose and intention.
I think that is very profound statement, and a very strong one when you're saying, sort of what is the why. There's a bunch of different ways in business and leadership when we're searching for purpose that people can take that. But I think generationally, and you've hit on a few things that I want to. This is how my brain works. We're gonna go over here, then we're gonna go over here, then we're gonna. But when you're talking about this, just this last little piece that you talked about, especially with the younger generation, when we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about younger millennials, and probably younger than that, maybe millennials and younger and newer generation than that,
Mm-hmm.
we have said that so many times in business, and I think oftentimes people want to shy away from that because they're like, well, we don't want to create this generation gap. Well, it is what it is. When people
Mm-hmm.
are different ages and generationally different, they have to be coached differently. Speaking very frankly, I'm an older generation X.
Mature.
And yeah,
You're more
well,
mature.
okay, I'm a more mature generation X. I need to hire you for my PR. So that, when I was being managed, I was being managed by either older generation X also, or the
Mm-hmm.
boomer generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, hey, we need you to do this thing at work. And using your 100 calls as an example. Hey, we need you to make these 100 calls. Why? Because I'm the boss and I said you're going to make 100 calls, and I don't care if you think it sucks. That's why we pay you. So get to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That whole tone changes differently from the 90s and early 2000s. And now when you're speaking to people and you're coaching people in the workplace, And I want people to key in on that and hear that, because I think it's really valuable. Well, you need to make these 100 calls so that, you know, we're able to communicate with our customers. We're able to be effective so that they know what's coming out. We're able to establish a relationship and be able to be more effective in serving them the proper products, or you know, whatever that looks like for your business. I think that blurs the lines of any business
Mhm.
if you're coaching people as to why.
I think the funny thing in that though is that as leaders, again, like the more mature generations, it was very much an authoritative dictator, and that's how those generations were raised, not only in the
Sure.
workplace but also in life, in the home. It's do as I say, not as I do. You know, you may be seen but not heard, things like that. And what you find, again, not a dig, I don't want to insult
No, you're
anyone, but
fine.
my parents, when I talk to them and you talk to them about like creativity, they lack a level of creativity because they were never able to be curious. And so while there are times that I get frustrated having to explain the why, or feeling like I don't have time to explain the why, it's also the ability to breathe creativity into these individuals. And the controller that I have in place now, that kind of stepped in when I elevated, she asks a lot of questions. And there's days that I lose my mind a little bit. Like, I don't have time for this. I make time and I try not to present that frustration to her, because in those moments she's creating efficiencies that I didn't find myself. She's being able she's she's able to put pieces together that sometimes are not easily conveyed, or easily able to be educated. And so when you kind of walk them through that process, you give them the ability to be creative. And in business, it does not matter what industry you're in, you have to be fluid, and you have to be able to pivot quickly, which forces you to be creative. And so if you don't have that creative component, you are going to have a hard time being successful with upward mobility, my opinion.
So when you're saying you don't have the creative component, it can hinder your business growth.
I think so, especially in
Absolutely.
our space, in the food industry, with the changing administration coming in. There's a lot of regulation changes.
Sure.
There's new packaging guidelines. There's tariffs that are being implemented across multiple industries. But if you take that, like, I have a tariff now of 145%, and you freak out, and instead of being creative and how am I going to mitigate this,
Hmm.
you pigeonhole yourself, while your competitors are being creative and finding ways to mitigate that, or communicating with customers in a transparent way. So yeah, if you're not creative, I truly believe you're hindering yourself and your business.
So something else I want to dive in on, and this could be, uh, I guess, a little bit of a risky question, but I'm going to ask it because one of the things that you brought up a few minutes ago was you said, "Hey, you were fortunate to have a woman as a mentor," and I've
Mhm.
always acknowledged when we talk on this show, I love having conversations with people from all different backgrounds. I've been very fortunate to have a very diverse group of guests.
Mhm.
I've also always acknowledged there is a difference between men and women when you're managing and coaching in business, and that was one of the things that you brought up. You said, "Look, I had a really good mentor." So was the CEO and the owner prior to you, the person that started this, was it a woman that
No,
started
so the founder and CEO was a male.
Okay.
The CFO was a female, and
Okay.
I think, just like in a traditional marriage, both play a valuable part, right? Like,
Sure.
I learned a lot of firmness and directness, and um, the ability to hold my own in a boardroom from the previous CEO. But I learned that softness, that compassionate, the being able to be firm but gentle from the female side of things. And
Sure.
more of my time was spent with the CFO in the beginning stages. And so a lot of the mentorship came from that side first. Um, but there's value in both.
So let me ask you, because interestingly, in the role, I've been in an automotive role for years, and in the automotive space, men outnumber women. Ironically, in the department that I have been in, I do marketing and so forth. I primarily have been in a space where I've managed 8 to 10 women specifically the whole time. And so I have a perspective of there is a difference in managing men and women, and sometimes in the way you communicate and the way they communicate and learn. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious from a woman's perspective, Cash, what do you see some of the differences are when when you're teaching, for example, when you are communicating across your company and so forth? Do you experience differences for you as a woman communicating with women versus you as a woman communicating with men? Is that something? And again, not trying to create an
No.
uncomfortable line of questioning. I
Yeah.
think this is something, especially, I will tell you, probably 60% of my audience is men. This is something I think men need to hear. It's like,
Mhm.
it's okay, guys, acknowledge we're different. So let's have that conversation.
Yeah. I would say, I try to be pretty consistent across my communication. Um, I definitely, that softer piece is more relevant with a woman or a female colleague just because of the emotional side. And I say that for myself too, right? Like my
Sure.
board, like I have thick skin, but there are things that can instantly tick me and create that instant emotion. Um, and I would say that it's not a weakness, right? Like, I think that one of the most powerful things in most of the women, by and large, that I get to deal with is they don't feel a need to be heard, right? Women, if you go to a board table, majority industries, it's mostly men, but women don't speak up very often, and I think that's great. But when they do, I would challenge those men at those tables to listen. Those women by and large are there for a reason, and it's quality over quantity from my perspective in a woman. When it comes to men, one of the biggest challenges that I find is being taken seriously, and it doesn't affect me. Like I just don't care. I've been in the industry long enough, been in business long enough that you have, again, be flexible, be creative in how you communicate and how you get your points across. But there is a level of needing to prove myself um, to them. I think also in cases where it's a more mature individual who's been in business longer than I have, that is where I see the biggest roadblocks in communicating with the different genders. Um, and I think I try to have compassion in the ego that plays a role, and there's science behind that. Men have an ego, and that's okay. There's a time and a place for it. But I think it's having compassion to those individuals in we're in the same boat, we're rowing in the same direction. Doesn't matter what the title is, you're here for a reason, I'm here for a reason. How do we make the best, most efficient, effective decision for all of the stakeholders involved in those situations? And when you can take some of that ego out on both sides of the fence, I think that those conversations tend to move a little bit easier. And another thing that I try to do, especially with with the male side of things, is look at it through the lens of positive intent, right? It's easy to get um, insulted. It's easy to let the emotions flood in and get frustrated. But if you can look at it from their side of the fence and know that, or try to believe that there's positive intent, it changes your mindset in how you handle the conversation.
I think that's a really good point as well, Cash, when you're talking about like, hey, come around to the other side of the table. You know,
Mhm.
when I was in sales for a number of years, and when I was in direct sales, that was one of the things when you talked about actual training and closing the customer, right? Like that's a bad word, but that's one of the things when you're selling, and if you're a customer, know that someone's going to try to sell you the product. That's why you're
Mhm.
there. They're going to work on closing. But I think that was one of the tactics, or one of the things we openly discussed. If you and I are sitting across the table from one another, and we're sitting here and having the conversation, then most times it's viewed as conducting business. I'm the salesperson and I'm selling you this product.
Mhm.
When you come around to the other side of the table, we're side by side like we are now on the screen, right? Now
Mhm.
we're on the same team. We represent the same
Yeah.
thing. We try and understand people. We try and be more empathetic from the place that we're at. And I think that's really valuable from any leadership role, whatever leadership role you're in. If you know, you're running your own company, you're a manager, you're a team lead, you're a department head. If you're somebody that's just the ordained leader because you speak up and that's what people look up to you, right? I think that's a really valuable skill. And Cash, you're bringing that up. And as we're talking about, you know, men and women, to see different perspectives. I think that's a valuable skill with people overall, because it's like, hey, if
Mhm.
I just come around and assume, and your statement was assume that they have good intent, or assume where their intent is
Mhm.
from. I think that's so strong. I'm curious. There's a couple things. Also, I know I always get like halfway through and then I realize this stuff. A couple of things. One, I would encourage you, for anybody that's either watching or listening, um, Icon Foods, you guys, can you tell us a little bit about what your products are? And is
Mhm.
that Icon Foods, is this something that goes, is publicly available? Is it something like you see your nearest grocer? People can check out iconfoods.com. It's
Mhm.
ICON foods, FOODS.com. But tell us a little bit about the company as well. I should have asked it early on, but I was
It's
thinking I got to
okay.
make sure and give you some pitch here.
It's okay. Yeah, so Icon Foods, mostly business to business. We do have a retail brand called Steviva. So
Okay.
it's like stevia, but it's got an extra V in there. And that's available at retail on Amazon and in a few grocers. But we do clean label sugar reduction. So we work with companies in all categories: beverage, nutraceuticals, bars, bakery, in reducing or eliminating their sugars using naturally occurring sweeteners. So some of the most common ones are stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, allulose, and and so we work with those companies to replace and clean up their labels and reduce their sugars.
Good. So, for anybody that may be interested or have additional want additional information, you can check out iconfoods.com. Also, as we're navigating through our conversation, if you're interested in connecting with Cash on LinkedIn, you can just look for her name. I have the link on the screen, but for the sake of anybody that may be listening to the audio podcast later, it's Kash, and then Rocheleau is Rocheleau. So if you are interested in connecting on LinkedIn, and then I'll have obviously other links and information in the show descriptions as well. So, couple of things, couple of questions. One of the things that came up, and you've said a couple of times, is you said, "Hey, you know, sometimes people have to, you know, there's egos you got to navigate."
Yeah.
I think that happens easily for most any type A personality. I've said
Mhm.
it on many shows before, you know, people in leadership roles, entrepreneurs, business people, managers, one of the places where they can experience the most growth is you got to be willing to bruise your ego, because it puts you in a place where you really have to listen. What do you think, from your perspective, what drives people's egos?
That's interesting. I think that power naturally just I think that that ability to hold power creates a level of ego. Um, there's something about the human nature in thriving on controlling people, um, feeling like you have the upper hand. Um, I'm certainly not. void of having an ego. I have definitely been in multiple conversations and dogfights where my ego has gotten the best of me, and it usually never works out. Um,
I feel that.
yeah, I can't think of actually one time where it actually worked out. I can think of times where I won because of it, but in the end, when you look at it, did you actually win? And I was
Sure.
reading something that was sent to me actually last week, a couple days ago, about when you let your ego win, it's at the sacrifice of something else, right? Like, so
Mm,
you won the fight, your ego won the fight, but it was at the sacrifice of, creating tension with your spouse, or creating a tumultuous relationship with a colleague who's now looking for a new job, or you may have lost a deal with a customer. And so when you look at it in that perspective, it's like, wow, what did I really win? I think for me, one way to break down the ego is to constantly be trying to be on the level with your employees, colleagues, spouse. Um, like I mentioned earlier, I don't my time is so limited, but I really try to make a point to continue to go out into production, even if it's only a couple hours here or there, or to work on things with the controller, to go through sales cycles and hold a couple customers, so that the team realizes, even though I have the opportunity to lead them, I have the opportunity to be at the helm, that I'm still with them. And it also allows me to have transparent conversations. So when we have to have a corrective conversation, or there needs to be some sort of disciplinary conversation, it makes it a little easier because I've been on the level with them. I could also be positive in the fact when I need to suggest a pivot, right? Like, um, in production, we had an incident recently where um, they were loading the blender in a certain way. It's the way they've always done it. Um, but when I gave some suggestions on, maybe we could look at it this way, they were able to listen to me in a way that um, I believe the ego didn't show, because I've been on the floor with them doing this. It wasn't just someone sitting in their glass ivory tower, um, dictating what they needed to do. So again, I'm not void from having an ego, but I think when you can consciously tripping over my words. When you can be actively thinking about how your ego is playing a role in this conversation, and try to check it before you walk into conversations, I think that's the real win in leading and managing people.
no, absolutely. There's a couple things I'm hearing you say, and one thing you'll learn about me on the show, I often will repeat what my guests say, and that's because I want to make sure, one, that I'm getting the point, because I know if I get it, I know that people out there in YouTube land or Spotify land will get it too. One of the things that I picked up on, and I think this is really important. There's a couple things I sit and write stuff all the whole time. Um, you were saying, hey, when I'm down there on the floor with them, or you said earlier on, hey, I learned how to operate a forklift. I don't know how to operate a forklift, but I think there's really something to be said. And what I'm hearing you is, like, you have to walk the talk,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to be willing. When people, I've heard this said before in business. Now I'm tripping over my words too. That people would rather see a sermon than just hear one. They want to see the
Mm-hmm.
interaction. They want to see the community. They want to see the stuff happen around them, right? And when you are moving with that sort of passion, so it's the same thing. You're out on the floor operating a forklift. You're saying, "Hey, I'm going to take the client call. I can handle this, and I'm going to do it," and so forth. When people see that, that in and of itself, you're walking the talk, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not just saying, "Go do this." That's inspiring. in business. And I think that's one of those things that it's easy to get numb to as a leader when we're running,
Mhm.
as for you, being in the CEO position for the last year, being in the CFO position for, however length of time prior to that, those are executive level positions. It would be very easy, like what you're saying, to sit in the glass room and hang out and be like, well, hey, I need you to do this because back in the day when I was, right? But
Yeah.
instead, when people can actually see those things take place, there's so much power in that. And people are always watching. You got to understand in business, when you're in management, when you're in leadership, if you're running a business, if you're running your own business, and whether you have 3 employees or 3,000,
Mhm.
people are watching you to see if you do what you say you will. And I
Mhm.
think there's so much power in that. The one thing also that I heard you saying is, when ego comes into play, it's almost, I would agree with you. I shouldn't say almost. It's never a win. It's easy to say, well, it's almost never a win, but it's never a win. And how do you tell when your ego comes into play is when we start to justify, right? Well, I
Mhm.
just did that because.
Mhm.
And so two other thoughts here before we leave this little section. One, I've got the name for your next book. You got to call it Loading the Blender.
Loading the blender. That's good. Actually, I'm working on a book, so I might have to
Maybe it's
run
called Loading the Blender.
that. I'll have to give you
Because
some credit.
but that's one of the things that is so simple. It's such a small thing, but because you have the experience, you're willing to share it with somebody, and
Mhm.
because they've seen you do the thing, right? They're willing to be, their minds open. They're willing to entertain that. They're willing to say, okay, hey, we can do this simple thing a little bit differently. One of the things you brought up, and it's always really hard to do this in leadership, and especially you mentioned earlier as a small business, you're managing 25, probably 25 to 28 people at any given time. You said you have 25 employees right now.
Mhm.
Corrective action and discipline and really telling people how it is, that stuff can be hard. In my opinion, I think it can
Mhm.
be even harder in a small business like that. What
Yeah.
would be considered a small business. Um, when you have to get into uh, a warning, a write up, corrective action, whatever term you might call that, how do you start that approach? Because I think that's something that's important to talk about from leaders. How do I start? I know this person is screwing up, they're not doing well. Where do I start with that?
Yeah. So I want to answer this question. I want to piggyback just one more point on that loading the blender question.
Okay.
I would say to those leaders that are going to take that advice and go start, for lack of a better term, loading the blender, driving the forklift. Intention matters, right? Intention matters so much in that. You can't do it for your own glory. You can't do it for your own agenda. You have to do it
Yes.
because you want to build relationship. And I think that that is kind of the segue into this next question, right? So I didn't do it because I was vying for the CEO position. I wasn't doing it because I wanted more merit as the CFO. I
Sure.
was doing it because I was truly curious about how the inner workings of our business worked. Because while every business kind of has these silos, marketing, sales, operations, production, those silos somehow connect always, whether it's underground, unbeknownst to us, they connect. And when you understand what's going on in each of those silos, you're better able to connect the dots with those silos. And so, my only caution is don't do it for your own agenda. Don't do it for your next stepping stone. Do it because you have intention to build relationship with these people that are here so that you have a seat to sit in. Like I get to sit in the seat because of the people that are doing their roles within the business. And so, and do it because again, you want to build the trust and rapport, right? Like I didn't do it to gain merit with them,
Right.
but it makes these conversations, these corrective active conversations, a lot easier when you have that rapport, when you have that trust. The first The first for me is understanding why the behavior is happening. And it may be me taking some time to peel away layers without having a direct conversation. Depending on my relationship with that person, it may be having a direct conversation. Look, in the situation with the controller, she's been with me for almost 4 years. If I start to see things slipping, I'm going to have a direct conversation. We've worked side by side for a long time. I know her work ethic. We have enough trust and rapport that I can have that direct conversation. What's going on? Am I the problem? And I think, again, going into that with positive intent, checking the ego, and knowing that the behavior could be just as much on them as it is on you, right? When I look at my children and when they're, acting in ways that I don't approve of or am not necessarily proud of, a lot of times it's frustration from they don't have the guidance they need. They didn't have the direction that they needed. In the case of my youngest, his communication is still growing. And so there is, for lack of a better term, a language barrier there. And so I think when you can check yourself, and again, I'm not perfect at this, when you can check yourself and know that that conversation may uncover some weaknesses in yourself, and be willing to listen, if nothing else, maybe not fix it, but be willing to listen and hear out that you could be the problem. That's the first step. I think the second step is working collaboratively in how do we fix this? Like, this is what I need from you. I hear what you need from me. And now let's put those pieces together. This is what I can commit to do to ensure that you're successful. But this is what you need to do to commit to ensure that you're successful. And then from there, the ball is really in their court, right? I have put forward what I'm willing to do. I have heard what they need me to do. If the behavior doesn't change after that, then it's a conversation of, I don't think this is working out, and that's okay, right? Like, I'm not going to kick you to the street, but we need to start having a transparent conversation. How can I help you transition? And we are in a small enough company where I'm awarded that opportunity, right? I don't have to go into a sales bullpen and hand out 50 pink slips. I can watch that process play out and have those compassionate, transparent conversations. But I think that the first point is understanding that it may not just be them.
And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of leaders to hear.
Myself
I mean, it is. Yeah, any one of us. I'll share a couple of examples, and I want to hang on a couple of things you shared here because it's just so good. That I was having a conversation with a young lady that works for me the other day, and I simply asked that, hey, what's going on with you? Like, this isn't normal, right? And she's worked for me for, I think, about 3 years. I said, this isn't normal. What's going on? And she goes back in time to a week, right? Instantly in her head, she's teleported back to a week ago when I was frustrated about a situation. She goes, well, we said this and I said this thing, and man, you just delivered my head on a pole to me. And I said, wait, what? Like, I'm completely, but she was still carrying that weight with her for several days. I shouldn't say a whole week, but for several days. And when I stopped and talked to her, the good part of it was I felt like I had good enough rapport with her, and we have a strong enough work relationship that she was comfortable to say, hey man, you screwed this up, right? She could look at me, her boss, and say, you blew it, and you were a real jerk in this instance. And I was baffled because I'm like, well, wait a minute. That's not how this went down. We stepped through it in course of the conversation. She goes, oh, well, yeah, I guess you're right. She took it really personal, which also is a good thing because she actually cares about the job performance that she does. A couple other things that I want to hang on that I just think are awesome and this carries from so many different areas of business and so many different perspectives. The fact that you said, and I put it in the chat, intention matters. Intention always matters. Why are you doing the thing that you're doing? And if you are coming from that place of it, like when we're talking about, hey, how do you handle corrective action? How do you handle disciplinary action and so forth? That is one of those things that is necessary in business for business to grow. And it's one of those things that's necessary sometimes for people to grow.
Mhm.
And so I have come from companies, Cash, you've probably hopefully never been a part of this, but you've experienced companies where it's like the intention behind the write up or the disciplinary action is because they quote unquote want to get rid of me.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, that should never be the intention. The intention is correct the thing, especially like what you're saying. You say, hey, I've got this gal that's been with me for 4 years. I'm sharing, I've got a gal that's been with me for 3 years. That should never be the thought. The thought should be, well, how do we, you know, how do we fix this and move past it? So what is the intention behind that? And then I love this, and I would tell people, if you are in a leadership role, write this quote down. And I'm going to credit this to Kash Rocheleau, right? She said, I get to sit in the seat that I sit in every day because of the people.
Mhm.
And you just have to, uh, that is just one of the most um, genuine and purposeful statements I've had anybody say on this show in a long time. And I want leaders to remember that, because I think it's so easy to lose sight of the fact of, well, I got the manager title, or
Mhm.
I'm the owner of the company, or the founder, or the CEO. But the key thing is, the only reason you get to grace that seat with your presence. That's not what she said. I'm adding color commentary, right? She said, I get to sit in the seat that I sit in every day because of the people. And you have got to remember that.
Mhm.
So that is super powerful thought and powerful statement. Um, Gosh, there were a couple other things that I wanted to ask you. So here's a curious question. I'm gonna shift gears on you. First, I want to remind people, if anybody would like to connect with Cash after this, more on a sort of one-on-one or business level, you can connect on LinkedIn. You can just look her up on LinkedIn. It's Cash, Kash. Rocheleau, it's Rocheleau. So if you uh, actually, probably if they Google you, you show up, because it's a unique name. But definitely, if you put that in on the LinkedIn search bar, she shows right up. Her and I are connected online. And then if you are in that food industry or you want more information, you can always check out iconfoods.com. Here would be sort of my closing thought or closing set of questions. Coming up from, I mean, you truly are that. This isn't meant to patronize. This is the only thing that
Mhm.
comes to mind. Like that rags to riches story. Hey, I started as an executive assistant and worked my way all the way up to the CEO of an organization, which is
Mhm.
just phenomenal. And everybody loves those, the challenger to champion stories, right?
Mhm.
You come in as that challenger and you're fighting your way through each of these positions on the hierarchy and working your way all the way up to the top of the organization. What um, what advice would you give other young women that are coming in on that level and saying, hey, I see Cash, I see you, and
Mhm.
I want to do that same thing? What advice would you give other young women that have that sort of drive and they want to move into those roles and climb that ladder? Do you have a couple of pieces, couple of individual thoughts, or one just super profound, awesome thing you could share?
I don't know. I feel like I gave you my one profound thought. Um, the first I would say is don't compare my story to your story, right? You can certainly, my biggest thing that I say on almost every podcast, speaking engagement, I've said it multiple times on LinkedIn, is I do what I do for people to see that the only ceiling over them is the one that they put there themselves. Like if someone has put a ceiling over you, you have given them that power. No one gets that power freely. So I would say don't compare my timeline or my story to yours. Create your own path. You can certainly use where I've gotten and how I've done it as um, as kind of the ideation process of how you might get there. I'm certainly here to have those conversations and help navigate some of those conversations you may have on your way. The second I would say is, while I have a huge heart for women in business, specifically a huge heart for it, we're seeing shifts in dynamics. We're seeing more acceptance around women in higher level positions. Don't ever use your gender as leverage, right? Like when I'm at a board table, when I am awarded the opportunity to sit in a C-suite seat, it's because I deserved it. I earned it. I worked hard for it. I proved to myself and the people that matter that I deserve to sit there. I don't ever want to be placed in a seat because I used my gender as leverage, or the need for diversity, or the need for a female to be represented. I don't ever, that's not a qualifier for where I sit or what I do, and it should not be used for any other woman. So don't do that. I think it's harmful not only to those individuals in their career, but I think that it's harmful to up and coming women. I think that when one bad thing happens in a underrepresented community category, it tends to have a ripple effect across the board. And the third I would say is, treat people like people, whether they're C-suite or, your production techs, your warehouse workers, your logistical colleagues. Treat them like people and not levers for your success or drivers for the company's success. Really treat them like people, and just piggybacking on my previous comment, be grateful for where you're at, because you are there because not only your own successes, certainly your successes and contributions will help you rise to certain areas, but don't ever become naive to the fact that you did it solely on your own.
No, that's absolutely all really good advice. Really good advice. I think just great closing thoughts, Kash. So thank you. If you would do me a favor, and ladies and gentlemen, again, Kash Rocheleau, thank you for joining me today. You can look her up on LinkedIn, as I've mentioned several times. I'll have plenty of links in the show notes and so forth. You can check out Icon Foods. Kash, if you would just hang out for a minute while I take this out and close the show, okay?
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Man, what a great show. What a great person. I again remind you that for me, this was the statement, and for leaders everywhere. I get to sit in the seat that I sit in because of the people that I'm leading. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Keep it, at the forefront of the things that you do as a leader, as a business leader, as a manager. So again, thank you to my guest, Kash. Do me a favor, if you would, everyone. Certainly, I really appreciate each person's time. If you would, share the show, throw some thumbs up on it. That's one of the ways that this podcast continues to grow. And most importantly, if you know somebody that would gain some insight and some wisdom out of listening to this episode of the Leadership Toolkit, the best thing you can do for them is share it with them. That's what we do as we grow leaders, and we want to impact the people that are on our circle, so that we can grow not just ourselves by sitting and listening into it, but growing the people around us. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. Until we speak next, stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.